we are on video 4 and we're going to sew the hexagons together. Now the way I usually recommend it in my class is to make a flower shape, and that's just because it means we can take a paper out of the middle. So whenever all 6 of those edges has got something else sewn to it, and it's completely, I just keep saying landlocked, but I think you know what I mean by that. If you've got it's completely surrounded by other hexagons, that means you can take that paper out and reuse it if you wanted to. So if you're making a big project, you don't need to have thousands and thousands of hexagons. You just need to be sewing them together at enough of a speed that you can take the papers out and keep basting them at the same time. If you were pre-basting everything and then sewing them together, then obviously you would need a lot more. So this is what we're going to do today, but feel free to sew them together in rows or however else you want to do them in the future. So you could make the centre in one fabric and the petals all in another one, and that would be like the traditional pattern grandmother's flower garden. So I have a bunch here because I already made some previously. I'm going to decide which of these I want to be the centre of my flower. So the centre of my flower, let's go with this bird, and then decide on what you're going to have around the outside. I have quite a lot of dark ones at the minute, so I might switch this up a little bit. There's a pink, that'd be nice. So I might do something like that. So now I've got my layout. What I need to do is next is thread my fine needle this time. So this is my 80 weight polyester thread. I tend to have like an arm's length, just probably sort of an arm span at the very most of this thread, just because I don't want to be working with too much, because it means that you're going to pull and pull and pull and pull. And then we're going to grab a needle. There's my needles. So I'm going to choose a thinner needle this time. Long needles are quite nice for this as well, so it's whatever you feel comfortable with. So there's my fine needle. Again, I'm only threading, we're only going to be working with it single thickness. And I'm going to show you 2.5 different stitches, and you'll see what I mean by half in a minute. So I've threaded my needle, and then we need to do a knot on the other end. So this time we are knotting the thread. And I do have a little technique for you. So I'm going to show you it both left-handed and right-handed. We're going to take the needle in, this is the left-handed way, take your needle in your left hand and your thread in your right hand. The thread is pointing the opposite direction to the needle, so the needle's pointing up, the thread's pointing down. You're going to grab that thread with the thumb that's holding the needle, so they're both in one hand. Then you're going to take the thread, you're going to hold this quite tightly so you don't lose it. You're going to wrap it around the needle, and because it's quite fine thread, I do it about 5 or 6 times, so if you had thicker thread you'd only need to do maybe 3 wraps. Then you're going to pull those wraps into your thumb and finger there. You might kind of need to persuade it down there by pulling this thread down. That will help move it along the needle, but you don't want to take your finger and thumb off that needle, because if you do then you might end up with a bit of a mess. So now those are safely wrapped around the needle underneath your thumb and between your thumb and finger, you're going to take your free hand again and pull that needle out from between your thumb. You're still holding onto the knot though. You're going to keep pulling that thread, keep pulling until you get to the end, and then you'll have a nice knot there. Okay, I'm going to snip that knot off, and I'm going to show you it the right-handed way. So if you're right-handed, you will have the needle in your right hand. So you're going to grab the tail of the thread in your left hand. Got to find it first. There it is. So your needle's facing up, so this is the same as I was showing with the left hand, and that thread is pointing downwards, so they're going in opposite directions but they're parallel. You're going to grab that tail of thread in between your thumb and your forefinger that's holding the needle and wrap it round maybe 4 or 5 times, maybe 6 times, I'm not really counting. You're going to rock those wraps back into your thumb and finger, so they're in there now against the needle, but they've been pinched in there. You're going to keep it pinched, and you're going to pull that needle, just the needle and the thread. You've got the wraps still in between your finger and forefinger, your thumb and forefinger, and now you have a knot here. So wherever you choose to start to transfer that thread over to your needle hand, that's where you'll get the knot in the tail. So if you leave a long tail here, you'll end up with the knot quite far up the thread. If you have a little tail, then you'll find that knot's closer to the end. So this is my diagram of how I'm going to sew this together. It's not mathematically accurate, but I think it gets my message across. This will be the center of the hexagons, of the 7 that we're going to use. So the first thing we're going to do is take, this is petal 1. You can start anywhere you like. You can work clockwise or anti-clockwise. I tend to work clockwise, as you might have seen from the previous videos. And what we're going to do is we're going to start here and join number 1 to the center, and then we're going to join petal 2 to number 1. So this won't be attached to the center at all, this second one. When we get to the outside edge of the flower, we're then going to tie off the thread. So we're doing 2 seams. Okay, I'm going to show you a couple of stitches, and then we'll come back to this as well. And then you can choose which type of stitch you want to use to sew them together. Okay, so I have my center, which is this bird, and then number 1 can be this brownie one that we did earlier. So as with all patchwork really, unless it's applique, you're going to put the right sides together. So you're going to literally stack them on top of each other like that, so that those edges match up, and then you're going to start sewing. So the first one I'm going to show you is the whip stitch, which is how I like to do it, just because it's a nice quick and easy stitch. You're grabbing, and this is good, it's good to have sharp needles for this, you're grabbing just the fabric and trying not to go through that paper if you possibly can. You might just catch the edge and that's fine, but we're not going deliberately through the paper. So we're going to make a little stitch right on the corners, and then for a whip stitch we keep going in the same direction. So if you started front to back, you're going to continue front to back, and my stitches are around 1/8 of an inch apart, roughly. You can do a few more than that if you want to. You probably don't want to do fewer than that. So that would be a whip stitch. I'll show you that one more time. It can be a little bit fiddly trying not to go through that paper, especially if you've got quite thick paper. Also on the topic of paper, it's better to have slightly thick paper, because then at least you can feel it when you're wrapping that fabric around. You probably don't want to go for anything super thick, because you will need to be able to have some flexibility and bend these as we go along and try and sew them together. One more for the whip stitch. Okay, so that looks a bit like this. I don't know how well you can see that, because they are quite fine stitches. And when you open them up, you can kind of see here that you've got these little tiny stitches, which is why a neutral colour is good. You can also try a ladder stitch, which is almost the same thing, but instead of always going from the same direction, you can alternate the direction. So you'll end up with tiny little stitches either side. So we're going from the center to the petal 1, now we're going petal 1 to the center, and it's kind of worming it, weaving it in and out, in and out. And some people think that they get a little bit more of a invisible stitch on the front when they try it that way. And thirdly, this is where the half comes in. If you wanted to, and this can be kind of fiddly, and this is why I don't like to do this, but if you want purely invisible stitches on the front, you don't want to see them at all, you can keep working with them flat. So instead of putting them right sides together, you can work with them flat, and then you can pick up like a ladder stitch still, but from either side in the seam allowance, like that, instead of working right on the edge, and continue that way. It's kind of a little bit more fiddly to do. I've just actually unthreaded my needle, but you might find that you prefer that because it looks completely invisible on the right side. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of a fast forward now to show you attaching petal 2, which is going to be as we've drawn on the diagram. Okay, so now we've got the center and petal 1, now we need to attach petal 2. So my thread is coming out of here, just out of this gap here between the center and the petal. on the right hand side on mine. Yours might be coming out the other side. If yours is coming out this other side, you will be joining the petal here. If yours looks the same as mine, you'll be joining the petal here. So again, right sides together. Don't worry about these threads just yet. Right sides together. And now what we're going to do is sew along this edge here. So we're joining petal 1 to petal 2. Make sure you get stitches right in the corners, and that will just help it from getting kind of baggy. Okay, so now I'm ready to go with that. Okay, so now I have something that looks like this. My thread is now on the outside of the flower because this is my center. This is on the outside edge. So now what I'm going to do is tie that thread off because I have nowhere else to go if I'm carrying on making a flower shape. If you wanted, you could keep kind of adding bits and pieces as you go, but you might want to just plan your journey with your thread if you're going to do that. So what I like to do is take about 3 or 4 stitches all in that point, just all in the same spot. So there's 1, there's 2. So you just kind of wrapping. There's 3. You know what, let's do 4 for good luck. And there is number 4. So now I can cut that thread. I don't like to cut it too close just in case I need to pull it a little bit tighter later. So that is the first round with the thread. So the next thing we need to do is join the center to number 2, which is the piece we've already joined. So we're literally solving that flappy problem. And then we're going to add petal number 3 to number 2. So like we did before, we're going join the center, add the next petal. So we'll always be working in that motion. We'll be joining the petal to the center, add the next petal. Join the petal to the center, add the next petal. So you'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bits of thread in total. If you go wrong, it's not the end of the world. It just means you might have to tie off a few more times. So I've seen it before where people will do 3 edges in one go and then they'll have to do 1 to make up for it. And that's fine. It just might not be quite as secure. So it might not be absolutely perfect, but it'll still work for what you need it to do. Alright, so let's do what we've just said we're going to do. We're going to take our thread. We're going to need to knot it again. So that knot that we did, you'll have a little bit of practice. And so now I'm joining petal number 2 to my center. So to do that, this is why the paper needs to be quite flexible. We're going to be folding that over so your right sides together. So now you'll find petal number 1's kind of bent in half almost. Don't worry about that, that's how it needs to be. You're going to start in that corner where they all join, and you've got knotted thread, so you're nice and safe. And we're just going to choose whichever one of those stitches you like and do exactly the same thing as before. You might find your thread gets kind of looped around that petal, which can be a bit annoying, but that's just the way it is. And that's also another reason why you don't want to have a huge long piece of thread. It makes it so much easier to work with if you have a manageable amount of thread, and because we only need to do 2 inches worth of sewing, we don't need to have a huge thread anyway. Okay, so I'm just going to work my way along here. Alright, so we now have 3 hexagons completely secure and sewn together. This is our center. This was petal number 2. So now it's time to join petal number 3 to number 2. So here it is. This is the guy I'm going to use. So this is where it's going to be added. It's going to be this gap here. So we're going to go right sides together again and join this edge. So then it won't be attached to the middle. But what we'll do is we'll get to this edge, tie it off, and then we'll start from here to attach that blue one and then add the next petal. So you'll probably find you're getting into a bit of a rhythm now. So I've just tied off my thread here. We're now going to join petal 3 to the center, starting here. Go along here, and then we're going to add petal 4 here, and tie off. So I'm ready to start sewing again. I've knotted my thread and off I go again. Right sides together and start in that corner and work our way outwards. We're getting there, 2 more to go. This is my next one, so this is petal 5. I'm going to join, probably getting bored of me saying this, but it's the thing that people got stuck on the most in my class. We're going to join petal 4 to the centre first, so the seam here is going to get gone, and then once we come out of here, we're then going to join here and sew this to petal 4, and then we're going to add petal 5. Alright, we're on to petal number 6. As before, we're going to join this to the centre, and then we're going to join petal number 6 to here. And then I'll show you the last bit. It's starting to get a bit wibbly wobbly now. It's kind of because we keep having to bend the papers to make it work, so you can always give this a good press afterwards. But you'll find that this is the last step. We've just got this loose guy, so if you wanted you could go the opposite direction. You could do exactly the same as you did before, but all you're doing is now attaching that green one to the centre, to the brown one, and then it's done. So this is our finished flower, and that means we can take the paper out of the middle because we've got it all surrounded. Now this particular one was one where we basted it through the paper with the thread, so you might be able to just pull it. But if you can't just pull it, you can just get a little pair of scissors and just snip that thread. I can actually just pull mine. Okay, so that thread's gone. You're going to flip it over, and this is now going to be the same whether you've got it thread basted just at the back glued or you're at this point now. We're then just going to carefully pop that paper out, and you can reuse that now and you can make more. You can build around the outside of the flower if you want to, or working rows, but now it frees up a paper for you. And here's a whole bunch that I've made in my classes, because I make one of these with every class that I do. So you could choose to arrange them together and then sew them together, and if you've got any little gaps at the edges you can just make the odd extra hexagon to just sort of fill in those gaps for you. And it just really depends where you want to go next with it.